So this is what everyone most likely be anxious to see and to witness what a cheat day, a refeed day, or binge days, or whatever semantics that they throw. Private indulgence, private salvation. Nothing more, nothing less. Welcome back to Decentralized Nutritional Science in the frame, lens, and context of structural violence and economics. So any typical refeed days will constitute anyway between the hourly ranges of 36, 48, or even in some rare cases restricted to just as little as 24 hours. And calorie-wise, this will be ranging anywhere between at least 3,000 calories to no more than, if luxury and endowment of resources allow, up to 4,500 calories. Physique samples check. This is what it looks like on an average typical expectations after the end of each low carbohydrate cycle, low carb intermittent fasting cycle between the formatting of 18-6, 19-4, or 23 formatting. And also not forgetting the 4 days worth of high volume training fitness meritocracies. None of this is meant to be taken for psychosocial or moral benchmark comparison's sake. Here are a few screenshots showcasing the leanest moments, although of course not without their negative and or questionable repercussions. Once again, this is only a showcasing and a sharing of N=1 evidence of what it looks like amidst prolonged low-grade inflammation, the stressors under the context and themes of structural violence, whilst also trying to retain fitness training meritocracies. Variabilities will no doubt occur from time to time. The purpose and goal of this first meal is quite pure and simple to provoke as much of an insulin response throughout our day of refeeding with carbohydrates. So supplements-wise, during this solid meals, we will have to consider, in addition to our mandatory mineral supports, digestive and over physiological mineral supports, whether that is zinc and or magnesium, we would have to consider the usage of additional creatine monohydrate, MSM, which is methyl sulfonyl methane, which is a potent sulfur donor required to effectively maintain a favorable state of methylation, and then followed by either the following 3 insulin mimicking support agents: chromium picolinate, vanadium sulfate, or, surprisingly enough, that many people may or may not realize, just ordinary uncoated aspirin. This author would not condone heavy, copious amounts of aspirin continuously and compulsively over time due to its own series of side effects and risks. Usually around about 1:30 p.m., just no more than 2 cups of coffee, depending on how busy is the scheduling of the day, even despite a rest day. So in this case here, this coffee is no more or less different than during the fasting days, but with the addition of several small pinches amount of creatine monohydrate in order to once again prime our physiology towards the methylation process. There appears to be the long-standing debate surrounding the creatine's interactions with caffeine, and unfortunately, such debate still remains ongoing to this day. But we have to keep in mind that creatine may yet be only beneficial in the context of feeding days. Hence, provided that we are already in refeed days, should, technically speaking, negates these concerns. Such concerns regarding the creatine and caffeine interactions and or conflicts may yet seem to be largely inconsequential in a conventional practical context. But once again, this is a nuanced subject in which this on its own deserves a much further nuanced debate for another time. So, a typical solid afternoon meal begins with either the source of carbohydrates, so in this case here, the more simpler, the better, under this author's own preference, in which that is as simple as, say, less than 100 grams worth of carbohydrates coming from well-cooked rice, and then followed by choice of condiments, and then followed by easy to digest available proteins and or any other existing cooked proteins, followed by some form of organ meats. And before then, we are pretty much enjoying our meal from there onwards. So after the main feature meal, this is what everyone is anxious. The main feature dessert series of meals, all the way until in the early evenings, usually ending in around about 6:30 p.m. to no later than 7 p.m. So what we can see here is just a number of collages examples just to showcase to readers just a simple honesty on how just mixing and matching principles is taking place as an example. And another collage shown here is a chocolate cake, a basic chocolate cake recipe in which that needs some additional whey proteins and most importantly again, additional calcium and also not forgetting the additional source of sweeteners. If and should none of those are available, just another round of rice pudding. Once again, when it comes to living under structural nutrition frugality, we just have to make sure that we have to utilize as many creative multiple uses out of any single ingredient, major ingredient staple, that is whether it is carbohydrates, fats, or proteins. So in this case here, we are going to turn rice once again into a rice pudding. Just mushy rice or mashed with water, milk, and one egg, and then followed by our sweeteners of choice and or other protein supplementations. What if none of those, none of the commercial novelty desserts are available, none of the plain flours and or dessert making recipes are available? What can we do? Well, what this author have gone through in the past is to simply just be making cottage milk. What this cottage milk is just simply full cream milk, high-low milk, or skim milk be microwaved briefly in the microwave for no more than 1 minute and 30 seconds, no more than 2 minutes on high setting, and then we are going to coagulate it with a coagulating assistant agent, either a squeeze of lime, lemon, and or apple cider vinegar, and then on top of that, sugar and or honey. Just mixing it all up, add a tiny little bit of pinch of salt, and there we go. This cottage milk is and can be drunk at any stage throughout our refeeding window. When it comes to evening meals, this will be more or less the same as the afternoon solid meals. Depending on the level of prior satiety and or hunger. There have been plenty of recent moments, come by around about 9:30 p.m. in which that is usually when the next solid meal opportunity comes in. This author would find it somewhat of a blunting hunger throughout that time. So hence, in such a case, this is where it will be a good idea to actually introduce other higher carbohydrate content vegetables and or root vegetables such as pumpkins and or sweets or commonly known as rutabagas. As we can see here in this example shown here, it will be a feature meal evidence showcasing some bits of chicken, plentiful amounts of spring onions, tomato paste, a little bit of condiments, such as in this case the usage of Caesar dressing, and then followed by a generous amount serving of rutabaga, or in this case, or commonly known as swedes. This entire Sunday, in a nutshell, is pretty much more or less the same as Saturday. However, perhaps the only notable differences here is that time to actually introduce more fibrous foods. However, how much fiber? That is the difficult question. It should not be too little to the point where we are excluding other micronutrients that is coming from vegetable source of fibers. However, at the same time, this author actually prefers it not too high either, to the point whereby, yes, there is some adverse concerns as soon as the next fasting period begins. What these three major problems is: number one, excessive random flatulences, excessive uncountable buildup of pressure in the gut, and lastly, number three, and this is actually a quite a legitimate problem for some people, including this author, is that there will be a delayed response in bowel movements. So long story short, if we are in an in a high constant state of low inflammation, great stress, whether it is psychosocial or physiological, then it makes sense that encouraging bowel movements is the last thing that we ever want to do. Also include exercise on top of that. There is another realm of difficulty and stressor yet again, in which fiber intake may be very wise to be limited. Not excluded, but just limited in all refeeding windows. Once again, these concerns may not essentially apply to everyone. This author may only wishes to disclose his own N=1 definite conviction experiences, as such that even just occasional high fiber intakes, especially coming by on the second day of refeed, will no doubt be leading to those 3 and or 4 very concerning problems that we've actually discussed earlier. And apart from that, the rest of the meal composition, selection, and decisions pretty much continues more or less the same as per Saturday. So this will be more or less the same thing, but albeit with some adjustments and or condiment variations and or rotations if the budget and the resources allow for such luxury. And that is that for the Sunday day of refeeding protocols. So what we see here is just a recent sample. Keep in mind that this is only for Saturday. So to begin, we've had our breakfast and our meal 1, and that is in the form of the rice pudding, as we have demonstrated earlier in this video presentation. And then for our next feature meal, in a good number of hours afterwards, we've had our main course, which is a pasta lunch. We also can see that there is some discretionary indulgence as means of dessert. So in this case here, a cup of ice cream and the inclusion of sugars. Yes, that's right, with the milk as the cottage milk recipe. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious. After that, we have the dinner section, which is comprising of a large number of potatoes with carrots and bacon. And then lastly, finishing it off with our last meal of the day, which is consisting of quick oats and usual meaningful ingredients and protein supplies to mark the end of our first 24 hours worth of feeding window. So in this example is a higher end of the calories example, which is, as we can see here, is around about 4,300 to 4,400 calories as an estimation. So first thing first, starting off with a rice puff cereals, crackling rice puff cereals, chocolate flavored, and also with meaningful amounts of whey protein, which is just boiled potatoes, yogurts, and leftover pasta in the pantry. However, this is just one of those examples whereby an allocated discretionary period is allowed for more indulgent foods. So this will be either feature cakes that is already being commercially made, ice creams, and or any other DIY recipe. And then followed on next, during dinner we have boiled rice with simple mackerel with just a little bit of soy sauce. However, the soy sauce here is actually excluded because it is insignificant amount of calories. For the desserts onwards, we are once again including in commercial discretionary desserts. So in this case, chocolates and or other carbohydrates that's actually readily available. And And so next we have another example, but this time this is an intermittent fasting example. That is that if on a Saturday that another exercise training period is anticipated, this is where a delayed refeeding period is practiced here, showcasing here no more than 2,800 calories. So hence to begin, obviously, we have our post-workout solution, which is that of the 200 milliliters worth of full cream milk and the whey protein powder, in which that is taken anywhere between 4 to 5 p.m. However, what is important here is that they make sure that our digestion system prepares itself for the big series of meals ahead. So hence, around about 5:30 to 6 p.m. is where the feature meal begins, in which that is the savory meal consisting of good, meaningful amount of protein, with some liver pate obviously, and some boiled white rice. And then for the later on dessert, we have our discretionary failed recipes, unfortunately. But it is a recipe and carbohydrate source nevertheless, a humble pie. So then, moving onwards towards the evening, we have another meal, which is, unfortunately, the carbohydrate supplies here was actually not so plentiful back then. So hence, we are restricted to only less than 200 grams worth of potatoes, but also we still have some proteins in our inventory, so we are using that instead. And lastly, we have our last series of meal, which is just going to be a slow digesting casein, gelatin powder for its meaningful glycine-based protein, and then followed by the full cream milk with some extra water to be diluted within it. And that is that as just an example of a time-restricted feeding sample on a Saturday taken in less than, say, 8 hours worth of feeding window. So that is that. A overall summary snapshot of what it's like in any refeed protocols in the life of cyclical keto plus intermittent fasting regimen. It is up to readers at this point whether or not they can actually wish to take apart any of these videos, experiences from this entire concept initiative channel only as an open-ended principle, not as dogma. So once again, take it for what it is. Feel free to comment your thoughts down below on what and how you feel about refeeding protocols and how you feel about cycling in and out. What are your experiences? Let us know down in the comments section below. Leave it forward, and thank you for watching.